Hello everyone, welcome. Poetry changes lives. Once again, poetry meeting history and a thought for the day. All in one little book. Here it is, in paperback. Poetry changes lives. There are not many books do that, you know. A dose of history, a dose of poetry, and a dose of wisdom, all day by day throughout the year. I think that makes a great present to give anybody that you have a high regard for, a colleague, a loved one, a family member. They all could do with a dose of that every day, in my view. Here's today's dose. On this day in 1564, the magical playwright Christopher Marlowe was born. He, of course, was born that same year, 1564, as William Shakespeare, and the two are often compared. Quite extraordinary that two such brilliant writers and poets should be born in that same year. And Elizabethan poetry is pretty wonderful, you know. It partly, I think, because the printing press was discovered in the previous, well, not so much discovered as introduced, really, in the at the end of the 15th century, in the late 1400s in England. People suddenly started printing writing literature, and that opened it up to so many more, a much wider public, and suddenly people had a real motivation to write and be able to get their writing seen by thousands of people. And the Elizabethans really got into that in a big way, and Marlowe's plays and Shakespeare's plays were suddenly printed and available to a much wider public. And I think that helped suddenly that flowering of wonderful poetry, playwriting, and indeed ordinary prose writing as well in Elizabethan times. Having said that, we don't know a great deal about the lives of either Marlowe or Shakespeare. We know the date they were born and the date they died. Both their deaths are shrouded in quite a lot of mystery. Marlowe, Christopher Marlowe, famously was stabbed to death in a pub in South London, in Deptford, as a result of a quarrel. And it's very mysterious because Marlowe, we know, was employed as a sort of spy by Walsingham, Queen Elizabeth's first minister. And it may have been that Marlowe was killed partly as a result of that. Shakespeare, on the other hand, was died a day or two after a particularly heavy drinking session. He met up with some friends that he hadn't seen for a while, and they all went out and had a drink or two and stayed up most of the night. And Shakespeare, at the age of 52 or 53, it seemed to be too much for him, and the poor man died soon after. Well, we don't know much about the truth of either of those deaths. All we know, and we're fortunate in that we have so much of Shakespeare's writing and a lot of Marlowe's writing as well. Some of his plays are pretty wonderful. Some of his poetry is absolutely heart-stopping, I think, in every way, as good as Shakespeare, in my humble opinion. Though, of course, the great Shakespeare wrote so much more that was truly wonderful. Marlowe only wrote a relatively small amount that could be called absolutely superb. I'm going to give you an example of each man's writing, and you can decide for yourself which you think is the best. I'll start with Christopher Marlowe, his wonderful passage from his play Dr. Faustus. Dr. Faustus, of course, was the man who sold his soul to the devil. In other words, he would go to hell when he died, but while he lived, he could enjoy himself and have anything he wished for. And one of the things he famously wished for was a meeting with Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in ancient Greek literature. Famously, she was abducted by Paris and taken to Troy and caused the Trojan War. And this is what Marlowe has Dr. Faustus see on meeting Helen of Troy, his heart's desire. Was this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the topless towers of Ilium? Sweet Helen, make me immortal with a kiss. Her lips suck forth my soul, see where it flies. Come, Helen, come, give me my soul again. Here will I dwell, for heaven is in these lips, and all is dross that is not Helena. Such beautiful lines. I think they're matchless as far as Elizabethan poetry goes. I think that's wonderful, wonderful poetry. Compare that with Shakespeare, another meeting, his Troilus meeting Cressida in his famous poem, Troilus and Cressida, his famous play. This is what he has Troilus say. I am giddy, expectation whirls me round. The imaginary relish is so sweet that it enchants my sense. What will it be when that the watery palate tastes indeed love's thrice ruptured nectar? That's pretty fine poetry as well, I think. For me, of the two on this occasion, Marlowe has the first place. I think those lines, what lips, what was this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burned the topless towers of Ilium? I think those are just unbelievably beautiful lines, and I count myself lucky to know them. Today, I will try to be objective and not be hasty to judge others, and I will continue to enjoy poetry as long as I live, God willing. Thank you for listening today.